Hello and welcome. I'm calling this meeting to order. My name is Ryan Price. I'm the chair of the Environmental Quality Commission, and I would like to welcome you all to the Environmental Quality Commission meeting on April 21st. This is a teleconference meeting with the EQC commissioners, city staff, and members of the public participating remotely to ensure proper social distancing during this federal, state, and local emergency. We will start by completing our roll call. And first, I'll take a moment to introduce the staff present. So we have our sustainability manager, Ms. Rebecca Lucky. And next, I will ask the commissioners to introduce themselves. So first we have, or I guess just to wave, first we have Commissioner Elkins, and we have Commissioner Gaylord, and we have Commissioner Cabot, and we currently have a few missing commissioners, namely Commissioner Martin, Commissioner Payne, and Commissioner London. So we have a quorum, so we can officially start our meeting. The first area for the meeting is public comment. And under the public comment section, the public may address the EQC on any subject that is not listed on the agenda. Each speaker can address the EQC once under public comment for a limit of 3 minutes. So please clearly state your name and your address or political jurisdiction in which you live. And we as EQC commissioners, we can't act on items not listed on the agenda, so we cannot respond to non-agenda issues that are brought up under public comment other than to provide general information. The floor is open for public comment. Rebecca, do we have any public comments at this time?
Thank you, Chair Price, and welcome Commissioner Payne. Yeah. And little Commissioner Payne.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Oh, so cute.
He's so cute.
Well, thank you so much, Chair Price and members of the Environmental Quality Commission. Welcome everybody to the April 21st Environmental Quality Commission meeting. And thank you for attending. At this time, we ask that the members of the EQC just to remain on the screen for as much as possible during the meeting. And you'll be able to control your own webcams and microphones, and staff will engage the webcams and microphones to make presentations and respond to members of the EQC. Hi, Commissioner Martin, how are you doing? And so with that, for the members of the public who are in attendance and wish to provide public comment, you can certainly do so, as Chair Price has already opened up for you at this moment for items that are not on the agenda. And if you'd like to make a comment now on, again, an item that's not on the agenda, you can engage the raised hand feature that's next to your name, and I'll be able to unmute your microphone, and you can provide your public comment to the Environmental Quality Commission for up to 3 minutes. And with that, I do not see any hands raised at this time. So I return the meeting back to you, Chair Price.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Before we move on, I just want to call out a special thank you to Commissioner Martin. It is her last EQC meeting with us, and she's served her 2 full terms. So she's been on the EQC for 8 years, and I just wanted to have us all say a special thank you before we moved into our agenda.
Well, thank you very much. It's hard to believe 8 years has gone by, but thank you very much.
You're welcome.
It's been an honor to be on the commission.
Thank you.
Just for the record, I think we're extending you by a month, if you're willing, Commissioner Martin.
Yeah, I did see that, and I wasn't sure if that was for every commission or.
Yes.
yeah, if you guys need me to, I'm happy to. Or if you don't, then yeah, okay. So
Well, we can
Hopefully
do
didn't
this
make any
again
plans the third
in
Wednesday of
May.
next
Yeah.
month.
surprise, Ryan, you've got me, I guess, for another.
Great. It's great news. I'm thrilled to hear it. I think we all are, and we will repeat our thank you in May because you will have served 8 years and 1 month. Okay, so returning to our agenda, without public comment, we would transition to our regular business. So under regular business, the EQC considers providing advice to City Council on sustainability policy matters or administrative actions that require City Council decision. So under our regular business, the first item on the agenda is the approval of the March 17th, 2021 minutes. So I will introduce that item to the members, excuse me, of the EQC and ask if anybody has any clarifying questions. I don't see anyone signaling that they have questions. Oh, Commissioner Payne.
Yes, so is this to approve both the minutes, and I believe there was something from the previous minutes that Josie was going to look over? Are we approving?
I looked
both
it
of those?
over. It all looked good from
Oh,
the last
perfect.
time. The work plan looks good. Yeah.
Okay,
Yay, thank you.
that answers my question then.
Perfect. So now that we have, do we have any other clarifying questions? Okay, I don't see any, which means that the floor is now open for public comment on this agenda item. So Rebecca, do we have any public comment on this item at this time?
Thank you, Chair Price. So again, if you wish to speak on this agenda item for approval of the March 17th, 2021 minutes, please use the raised hand feature that is next to your name in the participants list, and I will be able to unmute you so that you can address the commission for up to 3 minutes. And with that, I do not see any hands raised. Chair Price, you may continue.
Thank you. So with that, are there any areas of discussion or for this item? If not, obviously somebody can also put forward a motion if we feel confident in approving the minutes.
Seeing no hands, I move to approve the minutes.
I second.
All right, so we have a motion introduced by Commissioner Gaylord, seconded by Commissioner Martin, and we can take a vote on it if Ms. Lucky will do the roll call. Sorry, I dropped something.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Price. So Commissioner Gillard,
Yes.
Commissioner Elkins,
Yes.
Commissioner Price,
Yes.
Commissioner Martin,
Yes.
Commissioner Payne.
Yes.
Okay, I got everybody. Sorry, I can't see everyone on my screen.
Yes.
Oh, Commissioner, I knew it. See, yes. Hold on, let me. Commissioner Kavitz, thank you.
Yes.
And Commissioner London, did you hear that item?
Yes, I did. And yes.
Okay. Great, thank you. Okay, so motion passes unanimously. Thank you. I'll return the meeting back to you, Chair Price.
Perfect, thank you. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of a technical issue. There we go. Okay. Okay, so now we can move to our second agenda item. This is D2, and this is a discussion of the Climate Action Plan goals and implementation beyond 2021. So I am introducing this item, and I think, is there any other context to provide here, Rebecca, that you think is beneficial?
No, not at this time.
Okay, so, sorry, I thought somebody raised their hand. So we are going to open up the discussion for this item. I think obviously what this means is we're looking at what about the climate action plan needs to be implemented beyond 2021. So, right, the council has approved what they were interested in having prioritized by staff in 2021, and we're looking beyond that as relates to the cap. So I might look to the subcommittee on the cap to, if they have a recommendation for this item of where to start the conversation.
So
Yeah.
sorry, Chair Price, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you may want to call public comment before we get
Oh.
discussion, or we could just high level.
I think I was looking to see, I'm not sure
I'm sorry.
how to address, that's okay.
Should have
I'm not
added
sure,
for the
no, that's okay.
context.
I'm not sure how to address clarifying questions beforehand without having a presentation, unless it's just about the cap itself.
Ryan, I just wanted to jump in and say, Tom and
Sure.
I did give some thought beforehand to this agenda item. And we did put together just a few slides. So that can be just part of the normal discussion, or you could take it before public comment. I'm totally indifferent. So.
Is there a proper protocol on this, Rebecca?
I think to call for public comment.
First, okay.
Yeah.
So given that there's no presentation that was introduced in the agenda, we'll take public comment first. And so the context of this would be to address the cap or items of cap implementation beyond 2021. So with that, is there any public comment at this time?
So thank you, Chair Price. So again, if there's any members that are of the public that are in attendance that wish to speak on this agenda item, which is discussing the climate action plan goals and implementation beyond 2021, please use the raised hand feature next to your name. If you're on a call, you can press *9 to raise your hand, and I'll be able to unmute you as well. And with that, I do not see any hands raised, so you may continue.
Okay, so with that, it sounds like the first part for a discussion, it could be a good place to start to hear from the subcommittee.
Okay, great. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully that will work. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So
Oh, I
this is a
can't see it.
familiar.
I don't think.
I
think
can't see it either.
Me neither.
Yep, me either. Only Tom can apparently.
Maybe stop sharing and try again.
Tom
I
has
was sharing at the same
superpower.
time. Or he's looking at his own version.
Stop. Sorry, I'm just having to read my screen. All right, stop share.
That's starting to look good. Oh,
All right, let me try this again.
I can see your screen, I believe. There we go. Yeah.
Looks good.
Okay, great. So this should be a familiar slide. So again, we're just kind of taking another look at the climate action plan. Originally, we passed the climate action plan, that the city council approved it in July 2020. It was actually drafted the year before COVID hit, or the 6 months before COVID hit, maybe I should say, by James, Tom, and me. And, you know, had vetting with the EQC. The council finally approved it July 2020. The original plan, well, I'll just keep it high level. So just a reminder, it sets a goal of 90% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030, and then the elimination of the final 10% through direct carbon removal. The original plan was 76 actions, something like that, and we were going to recommend 6 full-time equivalents over a 3-year period to implement the plan. It was, you know, it's a heavy lift to try to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. So then COVID struck, and We pared the plan down to something that we heard from council would be more manageable. And that's these 6 actions, which you, I'm sure now are familiar with, but they were reducing greenhouse gases in buildings, setting a goal for increasing EVs and decreasing gasoline sales. Number 3, expanding access to EV charging, especially in multifamily and where folks can charge during the day when electricity is abundant and cheap in California. Number 4, reducing vehicle miles traveled throughout the city by 25% or an amount recommended by Complete Streets. Number 5, eliminating the use of fossil fuels in all municipal operations. And number 6, developing an adaptation plan to protect from sea level rise and flooding. As you know, council decided to focus on actions 1, 3, and 5 for the 2020-2021 fiscal year. And so the idea, the hope was that in July, we'd sort of be finishing those. And then we could sort of reassess. Now that we're looking at July of this year, potentially kind of coming out of the pandemic, the city's budget is in pretty good shape and will be, the hope is, and I think the expectation is that the city's budget will be rebounding. I think we want to kind of go back to looking at the original draft of the plan and see what we can add in terms of implementation to actually try to achieve the 2030 goal. These 6 actions will not achieve the 2030 goal. So we really are reliant on implementing some number of those 70 or so other actions in order to achieve the climate action plan goal. So just a reminder, here's the breakdown of our emissions in the city: 56% vehicles, 34% natural gas in buildings. So I threw together this graph, and the blue data points are actual. What I wanted to try to show here is kind of where are we going, you know, in terms of emissions globally, and where have we been? So we're talking in gigatons, which is billions of tons. So you can see on the axis to the left, we've gone from in 1990, which is a real key benchmark year that many people use as a reference point, from 1990, like 35 gigatons globally of greenhouse gas emissions, up to about 50 gigatons as of 2000. I believe this was a 2017 number. The orange is, you know, kind of what we're targeting or hoping for in order to achieve to keep global temperatures below 2 degrees C. It has this title RCP 2.6, which is representative concentration pathway. There are different pathways that have been projected by in the IPCC report, but the one we're trying to achieve is the 2-degree pathway. And so in order to achieve the 2-degree pathway, this is roughly the greenhouse gas emissions line that we need to achieve, is the one in orange. So I just wanted to kind of provide a little framing, and this may explain, I'm attempting to explain why Tom and I kind of lose sleep over a lot of these issues and keep bringing them up with the EQC and the council. So are there any questions about this graph? And I cannot see raised hands, so just ask questions if you have them.
I don't see raised hands, and I can see everyone, and I don't have questions.
Okay, great. All right, so the next graph is going to show this dotted red line shows you how long a gas furnace installed today, of which there are many being installed today in Menlo Park, gas furnaces, gas water heaters, gas cars being bought, But it sort of shows you how by buying or installing one of these pieces of equipment, it just extends out at the current level a household's emissions profile into this time frame where we're really trying to have this very steep decline. So this is why when Tom and I are, really focused on not having another gas furnace installed in Menlo Park, this is the reason, and this is why we can't continue to have gas furnaces installed and hope to achieve our goals at all. So, and for Janelle and others who really track closely what's happening with vehicle emissions, a similar line could be drawn for a gas car, which is bought today. Now, the life on a gas car is, my understanding is it's shorter, maybe 12 years, but it's still not something to ignore by any means, in terms of its how long it will be. It's sort of baked in emissions for us globally as we try to chart this really steep path to zero and getting into even negative emissions, as you can see, starting in the 2050s. So any questions about that? Okay, so with that, Tom and I were sort of talking about a framework, not to get too into the weeds at this meeting, but a framework. I think we'd like to recommend at least that the EQC consider going back to the draft plan, which Tom, James, and I worked on, assessing, dozens of different actions we could take, looking at the greenhouse gas emissions potential, the cost to the city, the staffing required by the city for each one, the cost to the community of each one, et cetera. To go back to that plan, and things have changed, but there's going to be a subset of those 70 remaining actions that I think we still want to carry forward. The right staffing level, at least Tom and I in discussion, we didn't have a chance to discuss this with James, but Tom and I think the right staffing level for this is not our current staffing, although Rebecca is wonderful. She's only one person. And we really, if we hope to achieve these bold but necessary goals of the carbon neutrality by 2030, we really need more staff. We think the right staff level is about 6 full-time equivalents, and we'd like to propose that across 3 years. And I just broke out here how they might be distributed across the organization. It's probably not sort of sustainability staff per se, but rather folks in public works, outreach. There's no adaptation and sequestration department, so that might be part of public works also, but planning department, dealing with permitting, streamlining and enforcement of permits related to electrification. And then this technical financial help, that might be someone who's sort of full-time supporting Rebecca or helping drive climate policy. But I think we need to build up some in-house expertise in this area, the technical and financial areas, so that as we propose policy, we have the ability to answer questions from the public without sort of having to constantly draw on a consultant or be sort of caught flat-footed in those situations. So I feel very strongly, and I think I'll let Tom chime in, but I feel very strongly, just from a management perspective, that our climate goals really are not achievable without proper staffing, and the staffing that was really envisioned when the first draft of the CAP was put together. So with that, this is my last slide. I'd like to recommend that we at least request, and council may not be able to meet this, obviously, and may see it as sort of surprising in its size, but I would like to request that we make the request to council that there be 6 full-time equivalents in the 2021-22 budget for climate, and then also request that we reconstitute the CAP subcommittee or constitute a new one to draft some recommended actions from among the 70 that we evaluated the first time. for 2021-22. And then the subcommittee potentially could present as early as our May meeting for EQC's consideration. So that's my proposal. And interested in comments, and I will stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you, Josie. I had one question off the top that's kind of a clarifying question. When you, so when we could think about the CAF items that were approved for this year, there was 3 of the 6, right? And if we look at that, you're going back to the complete list of, I guess, 73, right? That would kind of be left if you took the 3 that were approved off the top. So it's all of those 73. It's not to say that, is that right? Because
yeah, although not exactly, because we did sort of, when we went from 76 or whatever it was down to 6, we did kind of see opportunities to combine a couple of things to simplify things. And we sort of rejiggered it a little bit. So when I say 70, it's like a ballpark number. It might be 60, but
it's
yeah.
including the 3 that, or the idea for people to think about is to include the 3 that were not originally approved. So like 2,
4, and 6.
2, 4, and 6. Yeah.
Yeah. Although I will say it's been interesting because even though staff did not recommend that there be work on 2, 4, and 6, we EQC made a recommendation about, for example, BGI that Commissioner London is a part of, moving forward on number 2, and that the Complete Streets Commission, when it's ready, move forward on number 4, and number 6, that there be sort of updates and a council member starting to attend the One Shoreline, the county JFP on sea level rise. So all that has actually is happening. And by the council member Taylor's participation in One Shoreline, she's identifying some opportunities and bringing those directly to council to make priorities. And so it's interesting. It's kind of becoming woven into city policy, those 2, 4, and 6 in various ways, but in good ways, I would say. So it's not like there's no progress on 2, 4, and 6 is my point.
Yep. That's what I was asking. Okay. Thank you.
I don't know if I'm supposed to call on people or if
Go
Ryan
ahead.
is supposed to.
I was looking at my other screen. Janelle, you go, feel free, go ahead.
Yeah. So is the 6 FTEs, is that to complete the 73 items, or that is okay? I just anticipating like we should probably have, a plan A, which is everything we could wish for, and then a couple backup plans in case we don't get approved for all 6. So I guess that would be part of what you guys would propose in May. Is that what you're kind of thinking?
Hadn't gotten that far, but or maybe it could be an iterative process where we sort of propose what we think would accomplish the goal. And if we're told you can only have 3, not 6, then we sort of go back and say, okay, this is what we think we can do.
Yeah. I'm wondering if maybe to save time, we kind of think through that. If they say no to this, then what are, kind of rank order, what are the ones that are going to have the biggest impact that we really, really need to do? And what kind of staffing will it take to get those done?
Yeah, it's a good thought. It's hard because they're so distributed across the organization. So it's like we need someone who's like half-time outreach, half-time public works, and that's a little bit of a struggle. But yeah, it's a good thought.
Yeah. Okay.
Commissioner Martin?
Yeah, I just in thinking about like I feel kind of like it's hard to ask for resources, number one. So I think that what would be most important as sort of a step-by-step process is to first get an idea of what, like sort of like Janelle said, what are the prioritized? I think we have to be prepared that all 76 of our recommendations are probably not, to be fair, like necessarily going to get approved. So we might want to just pare down what we think is most critical. And then when it comes to staffing, I don't think we just go in and say we need 6 full-time equivalents over 3 years without a lot of backing of like, here's where, I mean, to me, that sort of is a conversation that comes sort of later in the iteration after we understand where the priorities can be. Otherwise, I think that this is going to not kind of, you normally ask for resources once you've got your plan laid out and a little bit more structure.
We
Otherwise,
have a
we
super
don't.
detailed, I don't know, sorry to push back a little bit, but the original plan, if you remember the appendices, is very detailed.
Oh, no,
like,
I recognize
okay.
we have a very detailed plan. That's not what I mean. What I mean is getting a idea of what of that plan that we've proposed, right? We've come up and proposed that, but what of that plan is the city willing to do? Like, they're not necessarily going to take all of our recommendations and put them forward. So we would need to get a little bit more of an understanding of where the priority is out of all of those things and what we think we can do, because I just don't feel like going forward with asking for 6 full-time equivalents is going to be an easy conversation to have out the gate without having a little bit more of an understanding of what of those actions are prioritized. I don't know if I'm making sense. Maybe others can chime in, but that's just.
I definitely agree. It's not going to be nothing about climate change is an easy conversation. I think we've taken the approach of just presenting, this is what needs to be, if you want to accomplish the goal, this is what you need to do. And you can decide which of the things that, you want to leave on the table. But I hear you, like, let's try to anticipate what they, what people might, what their reactions might be. And at the same time, I would say, I think if you do less, you're not going to achieve the goal.
Commissioner Cabot?
Yes. I see Commissioner Martin's point, but the whole EQC, we're the department going to.
I think,
we're
Tom,
simply looking at
Tom,
the
your
city's
audio
goal.
is your
and-
audio is patchy, Tom.
It's bad. Okay, is this better?
Yeah, try again.
Okay, but I was just.
Shoot,
that,
actually,
we're not
Tom,
like a
Tom, I think
department
it's a
going
connectivity
to the
issue.
team.
Tom, I
Do you
think it's a
wanna
connectivity.
Try taking off your video feed and talking with only your audio, and then you can put your video feed back on afterwards, but that might make it so we can hear you.
Okay, but how will you know I'm still here?
We can see your virtual hand, Tom.
We can
so
hear
we
you,
know
and
you're
I'm pretty
there.
good. I'm good at interpreting, so if you want to just go for it, I can take the warble and turn it into words.
All right, but well, I was first off agreeing with Commissioner Martin that it is a lot to ask for. The staffing required to address the climate problem is a lot to ask for, but we're not like a city department going to the council asking for that. We're simply looking at the city's climate action goal and trying to give the city council advice on what it takes to get there. But I agree with you that I think we can produce a set of forecasts that say, I'm going to make up some numbers here, but say with 6 FTEs distributed this way, you have an 80% chance of meeting the goal. With 5, you have a 40% chance. With 3, you have a 10% chance. So we can kind of try to show what happens as you staff up or down across that goal. And then they can take a look at that and try to figure out what to do. But it's ultimately a city management decision, city council and city management decision. We're simply advisors about the technical matter of the problem.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a good approach, Tom.
I thought I saw another hand too. Maybe not. Okay. And Rebecca, in terms of the process on this, in terms of what we're talking about, like how would this iterative process or presenting different scenarios work?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Price and Commissioner Gellert and Cabot. I think there's a lot of good points made in this discussion. And I think part of kind of looking at this now is just to kind of get ahead of the CAP progress update that's given to City Council in the summer, which also then includes looking at, what are we going to be doing in 2022 and beyond. And so, I mean, and I'm going to give some updates later just on the cap itself and the last couple of council meetings on that. And just kind of based on that experience and kind of seeing where the council is, I think one approach could be, looking at what specifically the EQC is recommending for 2022, and what is that kind of scope of work for that implementation, and then going to council with that and making sure they're on board with that plan for 2022 or other years. And then from that point, figuring out their resourcing, because we're not really clear as to what implementation scope they would be accepting. And so, and then from that point going forward, that helps me go to the departments and and then ask, do you have the resourcing? Are there extra resources needed? Or how do we start to piece together that puzzle to implement that scope for 2022? And I mean, it could be, it doesn't necessarily have to be 1 year. It could be, looking at the future years. And a lot of these projects are starting to cross over multiple years as well, which then restricts capacity to start new projects. So I think that there's that element happening as well.
Thank you. And
So
Deb, did you have
Rebecca,
a
I was sorry, I was just thinking, Rebecca, I wasn't totally clear. I just wasn't totally clear what your message was there. Can you?
Yeah, so I think it's preparing for this summer when we go to city council and give them the progress update, and then kind of what does implementation look like going forward after 2021. And so I think it's similar to kind of what Commissioner Martin and Linden are kind of pointing to, which is what strategies are we wanting to implement, and then figuring out the resourcing from there, but making sure that the council is on board with that scope of work before detailing the resources needed. Some of them are pretty straightforward. I think like the outreach, the education, but in looking at the 73 actions and how all of that works together with resourcing, I think the council would need to see that and approve that, and then figure out the resourcing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, and I guess the question back would be, is it fair to say, oh, hey, council, like, why don't you think about the scopes of work, but they don't necessarily know, or is that just how the process works? So the process works, this is what council would like to do. Then then the staff says, here's what is possible over what timeline, given the resources we have, rather than saying, we think these are the resources associated with this work, and we'd like to ask for both the scope of work and this resource to support it at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good question as well. I mean, there is an element where they can go together. It's just, I think and we learned through the first CAP process too, that, as the scope unfolds, there's a lot of onion pieces to that, and trying to get the right pieces together to understand what the full scope of that project could be.
Right.
I just wanted to clarify something, that when we were talking about resources, we're just aware that the budget is going to start being talked about and going to be finalized in July. And we wanted to sort of like put a placeholder for the budget. Roughly 6 FTEs is what we think we need to start working like seriously on climate change. And so we agree that there needs to be more kind of looking at that, and who and how and all that. But we're very aware that the conversation about the budget for 21-22 is coming up very soon. So just to clarify.
Right. And then I would just add that the budget can be amended at other points in the year. It's not the final point. We have mid-year, we bring things back again once we know the resources. So there's other opportunities.
And then we have Commissioner Martin and then Commissioner Cabot, I believe. If I have the order wrong, I apologize.
Yeah, this was actually a question not related to budget. It's a clarifying point. That I want to make sure when we're talking about that sort of planning for 2021, like my understanding is that what happened during COVID is we had all these goals that we wanted and they accepted 6. And out of those, they really committed to 3. Granted, the other ones are being worked on. But that's not to say those were 2021 goals. Those are to continue on. That's part of it. We didn't achieve all of those. So I just want to make sure, and maybe that's obvious to everybody else, but I want to make sure we're talking the same thing here, is that what we're saying right now is in addition to those 6 committed goals, which are part of the climate action plan, we would add more on, but it's not to say, oh, those were for 2021 and now we're looking at this narrow window, because to me, it just feels like the goal is to try to get them to do as many of our actions as we can, and they're going to be multi-year goals where there's no way we're going to get to what that was 95%. You know, I don't have them up again exactly, but if we were to look at and do a summary of what we achieved this year, my guess is that we wouldn't fully have achieved that. So am I right on this? What we're saying is, in addition to the 6 goals that are part of the longer term climate action plan, we would like to add more. So let's just be careful when we say like 2021, 2022, that's what we mean. Does that make sense? Because I think it could get confusing when people are thinking we're just doing specific goals every year and that they have a stop and a finish point, which we obviously know they don't. Does that make sense?
Well, I just want to push back. I mean, number 1 was to put a program or policy in place. It's not like all the furnaces would be swapped out in that time, but it was, I mean, council's direction was to try to get these 6 actions in place. So a policy or program for each of the 3, I guess. And I think their hope, at least, was that it would be complete by July. It's not, and it won't be. So it will extend into the next year, which is what Rebecca was talking about. So I think we don't want to like stop working on it. We want to continue the work, but I do think that the hope was that we would have a policy in place by July, for example, on number 1.
And Tom?
Yep, thank you very much. I just wanted to reiterate the thing I noticed in that graph that Josie was able to show is how we have essentially 9 years left to get to 2030, and we have to be taking rapid action. And so I think it makes sense to be very clear with advice to council about our estimates of staffing requirement. And then staff needs, I think staff needs to engage also in that discussion and put forward their estimates of staffing needed. And if they think they can achieve things with less staff, then, you know, they need to tell council that. But we, you know, as a advisory body, we need to try to get this information to council so they can act in time in the early part of the only 9 years left to 2030.
Thank you, Commissioner Cabot. And so I think what I hear in the discussion so far is highlighting that there's a couple different components. One is that obviously the urgency of climate change has not diminished to any rate in any way. So it's very urgent. There are a lot of things that need to be done, and there's potentially a lot of resourcing behind those things. And then where we would want to be cautious is this won't be the only work, right, that the city is taking on. So we want to be respectful of the fact that, like everyone said, right, we don't know exactly what council would agree to in terms of a recommendation. And we both want to be realistic that there is additional resource required for this work. We want to be cautious of being too prescriptive about what we think that work is, because there is going to be things that will get discovered on the staff side that are required for implementation that may not map exactly to our assumptions. And so it seems like that's where there's what I'm hearing as a difference is there's the goals that would be needed and how we scope those goals. So do we focus just on the next year, or do we go back to the whole plan and say this is what needs to happen on this timeline, and it may extend beyond just next year? And then how much do we how much is helpful information without being too assumptive to give to council in context to say, if we commit to the scope of work, we're also probably committing to a body of resourcing that looks something like this, right? So they're not just saying, yeah, great, go do it. And then thinking it's possible with the staff we have, for example, not realizing that and then getting frustrated later. So that's what I've heard in the discussion so far. Does that map back to what we think we're talking about? Okay. So given all of that, what else do we want to discuss around this item? Because I think they're all very, very valid points. We need to get other perspectives on the table, and then we need to, go from there. So are there people we haven't heard from that would like to share any point of view or ask any questions? Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, you haven't heard from me yet, but I overall agree with a lot of what has been said, especially sort of what Tom was, just to echo what he was saying in terms of, our job is just to get the information necessary before there. And I think the framing that you just discussed in terms of saying this is what needs to be done in order to accomplish this goal that has been set, so that they aren't surprised by the staffing requirements, is a good one as well. So all that to say, I think this is a good ask to make of council, and I also really liked the idea of presenting it with the likelihood of succeeding given certain staffing requirements. So I understand there might be something tricky with the order in which goals and staffing are presented.
Thank you, Commissioner Payne. Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Elkins.
Just for the sake of saying something, I agree with that assessment. I like the way that you rounded it up, Ryan. I think that's our role, is to say what's needed, and it's their role to decide what they're going to do.
Thank you. I had one question. So we've gotten some feedback from the community around, at least I'm pretty sure it went to everybody. And one of the points that I think was submitted to us is that, well, the technology in this space is changing, and maybe we don't need to move so fast on some of these goals because the technology is changing. What do we think about that? Given that this is a crisis, given that Get the Space is evolving, what do we think about the difference between like almost like a first mover advantage and then a first mover disadvantage, which is kind of what this a member of the public, I think, was raising. I'm not sure.
I think Janelle had her hand raised from before.
Thank you. So. Go ahead, Janelle. Sorry.
Thanks. Yeah, I was thinking about something kind of similar, which was not so much that I'm not worried about the technology changing. If we wait until the technology is firmly established, the planet will be, a little crisp fritter. So we really can't, I don't think we can wait for more technology. We need to execute with the technologies that we currently have, which will enable us to make great reductions in fossil fuel emissions. I was thinking, when you mentioned the word first mover, it made me think about the idea that, hey, why should the city of Menlo Park, our tiny little city, spend all this money figuring all this stuff out when all the other cities are just going to benefit from our investment in this? And in a way, it's a matter of pride in that, yeah, we spent the money and we are the ones who are leading the way, right? We're going to define how this happens and hopefully inspire other cities to do it as well. So I'm not terribly worried about us being the first mover, but I could see how people being concerned for, Menlo Park's limited budget would say, well, we should get money from other cities to join in on this too. And I think we had discussed that, and as much as possible, we were trying to kind of outsource things to larger groups like Peninsula Clean Energy. But just, I feel like that may come up. And then the other thing that I could see coming up is we're talking about FTEs. That includes, like, hiring people includes first an extremely long process. I think Deb has been on long enough to remember with me how long it took to hire, even one headcount. It was like a 6-month to a 1-year process. So there's the putting out, defining the job scope, then putting it out there, then waiting for the candidates. And it's just a very long process. And it's very expensive. So the city has to pay the benefits. And you can't just tell somebody, I guess you could, but it's harder to say you've got 3 years and then, you're out. So one option might be to consider budgeting for consultants to do this work. It would be, I think, overall less expensive, and these are defined projects. So maybe it's a project budget. All right, that is
Thank
all.
you. And Commissioner Cabot.
Yep, thank you. I agree with Commissioner London that a good way to look at it is as project budget, because I think lots of the tasks can be a defined term, say up to 3 or 4 years to get over the hump on a lot of this. But we definitely need to be starting now if we're going to be making progress. And then to address that issue of why should a little town be a first mover? And if not this town, I can't imagine a better one to be a first mover, one with more at stake in the climate problem from both sides, one with, as the mayor mentioned, the most educated population of any city. And, and parts of the city have wealth. And so there's interesting things we have going for us and at risk. And if we don't engage, I don't see why anyone should engage. And so, it looks like the buck resides here. The question is, are we willing to move it? And then others, they can follow us, and that'll be great. And as you pointed out to Commissioner London, we did get support from the larger community at PCE, through their assistance with the technical analysis. That is definitely the kind of thing to try to work into this if we're willing to put the effort into developing policies that can be expanded. That makes sense. And policies that can be expanded to other places is our only strategy for survival.
Sorry, I'm taking notes and trying to mute and unmute. I think Commissioner Payne had his hand raised, and then Commissioner Gaylord.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I don't know if we're trying not to go into specifics about the claims about technological innovations that might change this conversation, but I think there were some fundamental issues with the claims that were made in the email we all got. Again, I don't think we need to go into specifics, but maybe that's more reason why we need further outreach and education to demonstrate that there isn't really an alternative to actually getting this work done. Happy to go into it more, but yeah, like I said, maybe we want to avoid specifics.
I would say let's not avoid the specifics. Hydrogen being delivered to people's homes is not going to happen in the next 10 years. And it's technically really not feasible using the gas distribution pipeline. There's corrosion issues, putting high concentrations of hydrogen into those. So the person who had this idea just technically wasn't on point. And so I think, but the fossil fuel industry is, just like the cigarette industry did for 30 years and delayed any action on cigarette smoking. The fossil fuel industry has hired the same people to sow doubt and uncertainty with information like what was sent to us. So there is a very active effort to spread misinformation and disinformation to cause people to want to delay or to doubt, the technical options that are available for us today. So I think outreach is desperately needed. And I think maybe we got caught a little bit flat-footed because the fossil fuel industry is very well funded and is like, it's known that they're actively putting money into that type of effort.
And then
Oh, sorry. Just to add to that, since we are going into the specifics a bit, in addition to issues with distribution of hydrogen, I think they also said hydrogen is necessarily cleaner than electricity, which, hydrogen is usually either generated from fossil fuels, which is then dirtier than renewable electricity, or from electrolysis of water, where it's made with electricity. So it is at best equal. So all that to say, it rested on a fundamentally incorrect basis.
Thank you. I appreciate getting to address the question as a group, because when we get those emails, obviously we can't respond or talk about them in any form other than this forum. And so I do think it's important that we share that information as a group. And I also had concerns about the technical feasibility. Commissioner Cavett.
Just to build on to Commissioner Payne's point, the current electrolysis cells that are useful for making hydrogen from electricity need twice as much energy from the electricity as ends up in the hydrogen. So the best hydrogen can ever be is twice as dirty as electricity.
That's a very simple way to think about it. And that also potentially means it's more expensive. So there's that factor too. Commissioner London.
Since we are getting into details, I'll just give you guys the heads up that the Beyond Gasoline initiative, like the strategy there is to use an intense public outreach in large part to get people to not wait until their gas car dies to get an electric car, but rather to lease one immediately. So to get everyone who can get at least one electric car into their household to go ahead and do that right away. So that's going to take a lot of outreach. And we talked about the city staff not being very taxed for that, but it still is the conduit to get the message out. And we got, I feel like, kind of a lukewarm receptiveness to being the mouthpiece for this. But I just wanted to reiterate that the idea would be to generate the content and then the city would use its kind of bully pulpit to get the word out.
And Janelle, I hope you heard that at the last council meeting, that was all totally blessed, the BGI doing that. Okay, good.
Yeah, it's just that it's a partnership. The BGI can't do it alone with no funding and no support from the city. So we need to kind of have a conversation and maybe reopen the idea of how much of the city's resources are available in terms of communication channels. I know there is now kind of a website landing page about electric vehicles, but we would need to kind of really beef that up, and then that outreach pushing out. Like I think about the library and something services email that I get every single week. And I just am green with envy about that. their communication, they have that seems like wrapped up. So anyway, we aspire to be at the level of the library and community services outreach email.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
No, thank you, Janelle. That's come up before too. I think we also have talked about in the context of like the gymnastics programs and things like that get sent out to a large number of people, whether or not it's super relevant to you through social media channels, etc. And that's obviously really important to specific demographics, but it also is not relevant to everyone. So yes. Okay. What other points of discussion do we want to bring up? Because it sounds like I have not heard. So there's two places to go. One is to try to do this as an overall group, or one is even to take the step as Josie was describing. We haven't talked about this element of the discussion. Take it and have the subcommittee come back with a recommendation of how to think about it. We've talked about what that recommendation should finally look like, but we haven't talked about the process for our commission. So I think I'd like to see us discuss that aspect of this before we, if we've wrapped up discussion on some of the other areas, at least for now. What are thoughts on the process that Commissioner Gaylord proposed? I'm personally, oh, go ahead, Commissioner Elkins.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
That's okay. We can hear you.
I was just going to suggest that the subcommittee approach. I mean, I feel like the people who have created the 73 actions are the best position to suggest next steps and to create a recommendation for the whole commission to consider.
I agree. Does anyone have either a viewpoint to offer or disagrees with that? aspect. Commissioner Martin.
Yeah, just to clarify, are we kind of suggesting that we would go back, because we know that COVID, obviously caused a much more reduced plan, but would it make more sense to revisit and say, instead of looking at this as a like 21, 22 set of, like, would we just go back to them and say, we want to reopen the discussion about this full slate of recommendations as we did initially? And in other words, we're not kind of picking apart specific things that we would recommend for the next year, but just saying, will you support this overall plan? And maybe there needs to be like a little bit more of a dicing out year by year of what of those, I'm sorry, I can't recall how the 76 action items were laid out in a timeline type of thinking. But would it make sense that that's what we would do? Because we really did have a plan that was to be adopted over the course of between now and 2030. And we just go back to them and say, we'd like you to reconsider this plan. We put a lot of thought into it. We would like it to be, we feel strongly about it. And if it makes sense, here's what it looks like over the next 8 years in terms of like timing out what actions we think in terms of the flow of what year you concentrate on one versus the other. Is that kind of what we're suggesting here? Would be the path forward?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's a good distinction to make, Deb, or Commissioner Martin, that, there's asking for 21, 22, or there's sort of, let's do a reset. The plan we proposed was because of COVID, but we want to go back and reconsider like the full plan, which you adopted the goal of the carbon neutrality by 2030, but without the full plan. So we really need a full plan. So I think that does make sense.
And I just want to, for context, get the answer to what was also in Deb's question, which is, in the original plan, did we have a timeline that laid out by year? And does that timeline need to be adjusted given that it probably included other things happening in the first year than what has happened? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a good question. We actually did a bold plan and a moderate plan. And the moderate plan was happening over, the moderate plan requires more resources actually, and happens over 3 years. And it was broken up like 20 actions roughly per year. And yes, because the first year in vision was supposed to be 2020, 21. So basically we attempted 3 actions in 2021, maybe 6, depending on how you count them. And then, so we'd have to kind of bump everything back. So it'd be really starting in 21, 22 with the remaining actions. Yeah, and we could bucket them into this 3-year time framing. Just to be clear, I think most of these things could be implemented within the next 3 years. And then, policies just play out, that people, residents and businesses do the work of complying with the policies. But I don't think we need like over 8 years. I don't think we don't need a lot of new actions happening over all 8 years. I think it would be really concentrated in the first 3.
So, okay, that makes sense. And so either way, there is work to do to adjust the timelines, because the timelines were drafted pre-COVID. But to the point that's being discussed, we don't necessarily have to go back to rejigger the plan. We could present the plan as a whole plan with the timeline that now obviously excludes the time that's already passed. And then Commissioner Cabot, I think you had your hand up as well.
Yes. In thinking about the plan, the way it was adopted July of 19, it appeared to me to be they were adopting their choice among the 6 first actions, but not adopting the rest as a timeline. That was just additional information about the other actions that may be required to meet the goal. But I don't know that the council looks at that as a plan. And so it could be that we're in a position right now where the plan has 6 items, and that the 6 items aren't enough to get us to the goal. The plan did adopt a goal, but did not adopt enough actions to get us there. And so we need to come back with telling them what is the set of actions that can get you to the goal.
Yeah, and just so we stated that very clearly in the CAP document. Like we said, we wrote a plan that's in the appendix. Due to COVID, we scaled it down, but these actions will not get you to your goal. Like there will have to be more done. So we did state that explicitly. So it wouldn't be like, I mean, unless someone got confused or didn't read what we wrote, then they might think that the 6 things was going to get them to the goal. But we were explicit both in what we presented and in what was written that it wouldn't get us there.
I just want to follow up to that, Josie. I think you're spot on with that, but I would say that a lot has happened between now and then. And while we're knee deep in this, I don't think we'd be naive if we were thinking that they remember explicitly what we said. So we have to kind of just remember, like this year has been, we've had fires, we've had COVID. I mean, I would not expect, I think Tom's spot on. I think they probably think we've got 6 actions and we're good to go to meet our goal. So I think we do need to really reframe that and remind, and just because we said it once, it's not, I wouldn't assume that's going to stick. So.
Yeah, I was just going to say basically that same thing, even though I wasn't here for the beginning of this whole process, but it does seem like we had 70, you know, we didn't put in a whole bunch of extra stuff that you didn't really need to do to get to the goal. But we did have to scale it back because of circumstances, but now we're past that. And so now we're back to the beginning. And so these are the things that we need to do. We'll remind you of all 73 of them, or 70 or however many they are. And now let's go, right? So maybe it's
it's a really good point.
Something that a subcommittee needs to be created for, because it's been done.
Yeah, I do think, again, I think you all are making really good points, and I am steeped in it. And so I think, well, of course they remember that this isn't going to, but I'm being reminded that that's of course not the case. So I think you're right. There could be council members who time has passed and they think, oh, these 6 actions are going to get us there. So yeah, I think we need to have that conversation as soon as possible. And I think the 70 remaining actions need some tweaking, because again, to get to the 6, we kind of like merged some, and we kind of, it's not like we can just take that one off the shelf and just bump it back a year. I think it needs to be finessed a little bit.
So what I'm hearing is,
sorry.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
The same people who created the plan in the first place should be the ones to refine it, and considering the 6 that have emerged out of that.
So what I'm hearing, and again, eventually what comes out of this is a motion. So I'm just trying to make sure we're covering all the elements of this item. In terms of process, what I hear being discussed is that one path forward is to have the subcommittee bring back an updated draft in May that adjusts for the timeline, as well as the post-COVID buckets, like how things were addressed to meet the needs of a pandemic environment, and then what it could look like going forward now that we are not out of the pandemic by any means, but we took actions during the pandemic, and then that will change what this plan looks like. That subcommittee can take some time, bring that forward. And then as a group, I think the other part that we haven't necessarily wrapped up the discussion is what kind of output from that committee are we looking for? And one possibility is we just come back with the 76. This is the scope of work that we believe needs to get done to reach climate neutrality. Obviously, this is a long list and we anticipate resource requirements, but we say we think it's like this, or we totally defer to staff because, they may have information we don't have, or, so I think that's where we've talked about process, and now we need to talk about the output from the process, and then we can probably look at a motion. Does anybody have any other elements of this that we aren't covering that we should. Go ahead, Commissioner London.
Sorry, yeah, as we keep uttering the number 70, I must say I haven't gone back to look at them, but just the optics or the audio of that seems like, if possible, we should try to condense the things and combine them so that they are the smallest number of things possible. And I know that just sounds like, dressing up something, and I know there are many areas where we have carbon emissions. But I think we're going to need to really streamline and prioritize. And I know you guys have been working on that. I would just urge you to do it even more, just because, I don't know, I just feel like the number itself is going to be a real challenge for City Council to approve. I mean, we are asking for something that is urgent and definitely deserves their attention. And they're being faced with, recovery from a pandemic and economic recovery. Hopefully that's going to be smooth, but they're dealing with a housing crisis. They're dealing with a lot of things. And yeah, so anyway, I just think they'll be more receptive if we can condense and combine, or at least have major topic areas, and maybe we have sub bullets, and maybe that's how we do it. But like a handful would be more palatable.
And
I
I just took a quick
ahead.
read through too, and some of those do overlap, I think, in regards to kind of how to fund, staff or programs on that. So I think there's an element of that. And I think it's, and to Janelle's, Commissioner London's point, it is a large numbering, and we did have a 4-hour city council meeting, on the climate action plan just to get through 6 of the action items. And so I think, going forward, it's going to be challenging, and it's because it's so complex, not because of any other reason, just because it does touch, again, so many areas of community life and departments. And so I don't want to go into this with the expectation that, something's going to be potentially finalized very quickly. I think it's going to be a process if we're looking at trying to add the 73 or streamline those, and to have council have that conversation and get behind it, because they're going to ask a lot of questions about those. And then there's also the legal aspects of how much can we do as a city in certain areas, that are not quite answered, and that we need to dig into a little bit deeper. And as we had this conversation too, I thought more about that. I think it's just getting the framework that you're seeking, to advise, and then from that point forward, we can start to kind of shape how to get the information that the council needs to take action. So whether it's getting like a consulting resource on board to kind of go through and help me, because I'm also kind of working on the current 2021 plan and then trying to plan for 2022. As Josie's mentioned, there is only one, but to get support on that, to kind of really go through the requirements and then be able to kind of have the conversations with departments of what could be, put together or what could be shared, again, to make it the most efficient plan, but it still achieves the goal.
What are responses to what Rebecca shared? Commissioner Cabot?
When we developed the first version of the 2019 plan, Rebecca did meet with the subcommittee and helped us craft what we were able to craft. I think given that if we are able to go through that same process again, to be able to get staff input in the packaging of measures so that they can be combined or reduced in number, things like that, that could really help us also about any sequencing and that kind of thing. So if parties are willing, I think we can sort through the list and see what works now. Also, in some other venues, I've been involved in other projects, one helping to develop the 120 volt plug in the wall heat pump water heater that'll make retrofitting water heaters easier. And another that looks like it's starting to bear fruit is helping the Bay Area Air Quality Management District look at their role in addressing the problem of nitrous oxides, the the NOx from combustion that is in their purview, and having them work on getting devices off the shelf. So building a policy that will remove gas-fired devices from the shelves starting in 2027. So just being able to look at those couple of things that are changing in the environment around us, how would we rejiggle some of the measures and actions in the plan?
Go ahead, Commissioner Gaylor.
Yeah, I also want to say when we knew pandemic was coming, we did look at, hey, how can we get the fastest running start on this thing? So we did look at some of the heavy lift things that were like, we got to start this, the furnaces last 30 years. We got to start working on that now. So we did front load it. So Rebecca's totally right that the council is having, and she'll inform us, but the council is having very robust debates over some of these things that are heavy lifts. And not to say that the other 70 items that we came up with, they require attention, but they may not be quite as controversial. I think there's probably a need for more funding. For example, once we get a burnout ordinance in place, we have to figure out how are we going to get all those furnaces that are only 15 years old by 2030? How are we going to incentivize people, probably like with cash for clunkers or something? How are we going to incentivize people to swap those out early? And so maybe that's like applying for grant money. And, luckily we have a new federal administration that isn't going to focus in on this particular, they'll help us some what they're doing, but it's not like we still have to we still have to pass the policies, but there could very well be funding if we're positioned well and we know what it is, the kind of program that we want to launch. It's very likely that there will be funding to help us to achieve the goals. And I don't know how much of you follow this in the press, but tomorrow it's thought that with Earth Day, Biden is going to announce a doubling of the target, the carbon reduction targets for the US. So from instead of 26% by 2025, which Obama agreed to, he's going to up it to 50% by 2030. So anyway, so there's going to be more momentum, more dollars potentially available to reach our goals. And I think the remaining actions are going to be maybe less of a heavy lift on the policy side and more on the funding side, which could dovetail with the federal action.
Thank you. Are there other points for where I sit? It sounds like there is potential work to do on the original overall plan that makes sense in my mind for the subcommittee to take a pass at it. And I also agree with the point that we should, I agree with the point. If someone came back to me and said, there are 70 things your team at work has to do now that they didn't have to do before, I'd be like, what? New people, please, And so I think it's obvious that there will be some resource requirement. And it's a balance between saying we think there's more resource requirement based on what we believe we know it's this, but I also think we need to acknowledge it's not our area, right? Like the staff is going to know, and there could be things that staff is doing today that they know they don't do in 2 years. There could be things like that, right, that we don't know, or there could be things that we don't know about that they are going to have to take on next year that they know about. So I think their viewpoint on resourcing is really, really, really critical. So we don't want it to come across as like, we know that, I don't think, and so here's exactly what you should expect, council, because that's a difficult spot. So
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting you're saying that, but
Yeah.
I think that's where it gets like, we want to make some kind of statement about it, I think, but we don't want to be too specific so that it seems like that's all that it would be without having a complete picture.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I would defer to staff, absolutely. And I think we did that in the first round. And we would do that again because absolutely they know best what would be required. I think as advisors to council, I think we want to be clear that like, this goal will not be met with Rebecca alone. Like, I think we need to just be very clear about that with them. And, as a council who's choosing and has budget constraints, like you know, you can have that sort of magical thinking and wish that that were the case. And I think we just need to be very clear messengers that that won't happen.
And I agree with what Rebecca said too, that it is very complex. And so our ability to simplify it, but also to highlight, I think that it touches across different parts of the city is important, because I also think that's, and I think the email that we got, right, is a perfect example of how technical these issues are, and how obviously everybody wants the planet to be a good place to live because we don't have an alternative. And we also want to believe that that is probably easier than it actually is to do. And so if somebody tells you, oh, hydrogen is magical, maybe you want to believe it. And I understand that. I would want to believe that too, right? But the reality is that's not feasible. And so I think trying to make that aspect strong and simple is helpful, because it is such a technical issue, and generally speaking, people are not well informed, myself included in many ways, on exactly how to do this, right? And that could be true if they're, you know, talking to vendors, talking to HVAC repair guys, talking to whoever. So what I hear is we're talking about simplicity, updating the plan, having the subcommittee do that update, and then bring something to council that signals that there's a resource investment, but doesn't commit saying this is everything you would need, or this is, you know, the maximum of what you would need, or anything like that. And sorry, Commissioner London.
That I think you're raising some great points, that as we rank these kind of like our wish list of everything, and then, okay, plan B, plan C, we should also include, you know, we should kind of rank these by biggest carbon impact, simplicity of execution. So doesn't require a ton of, you know, figuring stuff out. There's not a lot of gaps. And just make sure, kind of to Tom's point, that we really arrest things that are going to be sunk commitments to carbon as much as possible first. I mean, the hardest thing is the front loading. Like, you know, it becomes ever more expensive if we wait on these things. And like, we don't even want to stop for 1 minute the moving train that is items 1, 3, and 5. Those need to keep going during this whole time. And we need to, you know, there's some others that really need to be front loaded. So I guess just trying to prioritize them that way as well might be helpful.
So given we've talked about the deliverable and the process and different factors of the deliverable, is there anything else that we want to discuss before anyone considers introducing a motion on how we want to move forward?
I don't know if we include in the motion, but who would be, so Tom and I have been doing a lot of work on building electrification, but James has not been a part of that. James was a part of the original committee, but I want to assess his availability. I know he has a baby and got other stuff going on. I would love for James to be involved again, but I just want to assess the feasibility of that.
Yeah, I'm happy to pitch in where I can. I'm in the middle of job interviews right now, so I'm a little busy sometimes, but yeah, I mean, depends. If we're trying to look for a turnaround for next month for bringing this back to the commission, I'm sure I can meet with you guys a couple times. But yeah, hopefully once I get a new job, I'll have a little bit more stable of a schedule lined up.
Excellent. So now we know the who, and so we've got the who, we've got the process, and we've got a ballpark around feedback on the deliverable. Obviously, we will discuss the final deliverable when we actually meet in May, but I think we've been able to share some feedback around our expectations. Is there anything else before we think about a motion? And Commissioner London, is your hand just raised from before, or is it okay? That's okay, just checking. Okay, so go ahead.
I just want to add, so I think, so what I understand too is you're trying to, well, the attempt is to try to make it before the budget is passed, which is a great pathway. But I do want to be mindful of Tom's or Commissioner Cabot's request, you know, to have staff help. So I think that's kind of where the crux is, because I'm neck deep in cap number 1 and trying to get the cost effectiveness analysis finished and get all of those pieces together. And so it's going to be very difficult for me to probably meet in that time frame. Would be more ideal, and I could try to find even other kind of resources to help potentially, is if it was brought back in June. But again, I completely understand if you're trying to make a target date, but I just wanted to provide that kind of expectation that I may not be as available if you're shooting for May.
And what we could potentially do in May is bring back what we think it is, like have the subcommittee do the work we've discussed, but not necessarily have the input from staff. And then is that also possible? And then revisit, because I wouldn't at least want a bunch of work to be done and then have it not factor into the version that actually the EQC as a body approves, right, to go to council. So this order of operations could be the subcommittee puts work together, brings it forward to the EQC in May, and then it goes, we say, yes, this is the direction we want to go. We just want to have input from staff. And then the concern is that would require waiting until the June meeting, at which point we might want to revisit it again, and then we wouldn't be able to submit it before a budget. Is that right? And is it feasible to even present this to council before June? Oh no, I think Rebecca froze. Oh, you're back.
No, I'm not. I'm just, I'm still.
Maybe I think.
It's, I mean, there could be advice, general advice and guidance, and then staff could take that and work with it as part of the budgetary process. So, I mean, if it's an open-ended, you know, we're looking to really, you know, look at this cap and go beyond just the 6 measures that you've already, you know, adopted, and that we know you're going to need more resources. You know, I think that can be included, you know, in a staff report on the budget as a recommendation from the EQC. And at that point, the council can kind of direct or have that pathway to make a decision on that recommendation. And then they'll probably ask for follow-up from staff as to, okay, well, what does this look like? And since they, as Commissioner Gellard mentioned, they already have the plan. I mean, it's on the website. It shows like the full 73 measures. There is some ability to access that information of what that would look like.
I had a question about the budget process. When would the staff write the staff report on the budget? Meaning, when would you potentially want to add that paragraph or whatever on sustainability is requesting this for the budget? Like, what's the date on that?
Yeah, so typically it's probably like right after that meeting in May that you have. But give me a second, let me look at some dates here.
No problem. And then we have a Commissioner Cabot waiting to share.
While we're waiting, I guess I'll try to share. I think what we could do tonight is have move to have the subcommittee meet and prepare something for the full EQC review in May with as much assistance as we find available from the staff. So then we also ask that an item be agendized in May for the EQC to review what the subcommittee puts together and to decide what to do with it. For example, they could send it back again through the subcommittee with staff help, or the full commission in May could decide to send a memo to council informing them of our assessment of the a plan suggestion and staffing requirements, because I'm thinking we have an obligation to keep the council informed about the level of staffing required to stay on track and to not miss a deadline for the budget process. But I also know, our recommendations are not they're not requests. They're just analysis and recommendation. And I think staff can do a better job at defining what is actually needed.
Right. So we can say
those-
we anticipate staffing needed.
Mhm.
Obviously, staff has not had, like, there has not been the opportunity to dig into these items and fully understand the resources, but we wanted to flag at this time that we would anticipate resources needed across these work areas to fully implement this plan, and that is what gets us to carbon neutrality by 2030.
Yeah, and what I was trying to suggest was I think we want to leave ourselves able to make a motion in May to recommend something to council, and also able to defer a month if that were the thing that we decide in May. But
Yeah, and it
That
seems
makes-
like we've had that process before, right? Like the EQC agrees on something. I think this is how the CAP went. I mean, even though Rebecca was involved in, for example, the staffing questions about the CAP with the subcommittee, eventually the EQC agreed on something, and then Rebecca and staff really dug in and had us, between EQC and council, had a specific recommendation to council about staffing and budget. So that came between coming to EQC and council. So, I mean, there could be something similar in this process.
I think I am comfortable with that also. What I want to respect is that we honor Rebecca's statement about her availability and make sure that we can do the deliverable in May without her time, given that she will not be available to meet with the subcommittee. So does the subcommittee feel like that is feasible?
Yeah. I mean,
right.
And sorry, go ahead,
It's
Tom.
simply a less informed, I think we can do it. It's simply a less informed document. That's all. And, it may be enough, and it may need, more work before the fee can approve it. See
And-
how the full body feels when they.
That's what I was gonna say. And we understand, I think we're all hearing this, so we all can understand that that is the case when we revisit the conversation in May, sorry, not with May. There is no one named May. I'm just tired. And then we can go from there. So, and see how we feel at that May meeting. Okay. So all of that said, it sounds like the motion on the table is the former subcommittee be reformed to go through the CAP. So that's Josie, Tom, and James, go through the original CAP plan that's published on the website and adjust things based on the fact that timeline is different, and we implemented some things for COVID or during COVID that were different than the original plan and how they were talked about. So we take a pass at it, and they bring that draft back to the commission in May. And in May, we'll make a decision. Does that sound like a proper motion? If
Yes.
somebody feels that way, they could second it now that Rebecca said it's okay.
I second that.
And now we can vote
Yeah.
on a roll
I'd like to
call.
second that.
Okay, great. Commissioner Elkins,
Yes.
Commissioner Price,
Yes.
Commissioner Payne,
Yes.
Commissioner Gillard,
yes.
Commissioner Martin,
Yes.
Commissioner London,
Yes.
and Commissioner Cabot. Are you frozen? No. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we can go.
Sorry,
back
I
to the
just wanted to,
agenda. Oh,
Rebecca, did you get the date for the budget memo?
Oh, yes. Great question. Yeah. So I was spot on. So it's basically like right after your meeting in May. So it's like the last week of May and June. So like those first couple weeks in June is when the budget, usually a study session, and then finalizing it at least by the end of June. So it's good timing in that regard. And the only thing I was also going to add, I think when we did this last year, it was also just looking at the resources of other cities. I remember that like Mountain View and Sunnyvale seemed to have, they had dollar amounts. And so it's just comparable to see like the amount of actions that they're completing and then the resources that they're undertaking. I don't know if they were able to complete all of that, because I know some positions were put on hold because of the pandemic, just in other kind of cities in that regard. So, but I think it's useful knowledge.
Yeah, Mountain View has $10 million, I think, and Palo
Yeah.
Alto, Tom was saying, has like 12, not fully dedicated staff, but a team of 12 across the organization who's their climate team.
In Palo Alto?
That's what
Yeah,
Tom
it
was
looked
saying.
like a team of 9.
Oh, really?
9.
Oh,
Right, but it's several utility staff having their own gas and electric utilities. They've got a lot of work to do on both sides. And then sustainability staff, planning staff, public works.
okay.
And this, in a way, actually transitions us to the last item on our agenda, which is the updates from either commissioners or staff to share. Excuse me. And do we take public comment on this item, or do we not?
No.
Okay. So that was what I thought, but just making sure. So do people have updates to share? I know we have a staff update. Oh, Commissioner Elkins.
Yeah, I just wanted to report back on the gas leaf blower bill that Berman has proposed. Mark Berman, Assembly member, which was AB 1346. And we discussed it briefly at the last meeting, and I was just going to find out some more facts about that and report to you. I don't think there's been a specific, there was some email from Berman's office to one of the council members asking if the council would endorse this bill. But so I guess that's a question in front of the commission, is whether we want to recommend that the council do that. So basically the bill would allow, would ban the sale of gas powered leaf blowers after July of 2024. It wouldn't ban the use or the importation from other jurisdictions of blowers. And so for me personally, I don't think this, I think while that's perfectly fine in terms of addressing the climate crisis, because as we know that gas leaf blowers are not a humongous contribution, they're just a terrible contribution relative to their size. And obviously a public nuisance, that's a different issue. But so from a standpoint of just purely whether or not this is sufficient to address that issue to become carbon neutral by 2035, I think that's perfectly fine. But in terms of the question of whether gas leaf blowers should exist, it's not sufficient, because you could still buy a brand new gas leaf blower up until July of 2024. You can use that thing for 10 years or conceivably longer if you could get the thing fixed, or you could go to Nevada and buy one. So that's another 10, 12 years from now of gas leaf blowers infecting our neighborhoods. And so in my opinion, it's not something that is worth an endorsement from the council. And if anybody has any questions about that, or feels like maybe this is something that we should recommend the council endorse, then that's up to you. Or questions about that, about the bill.
Can we discuss? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
In updates?
Well, it's more of an update. I mean, if you
Yeah.
want to discuss this, then we can have an agenda item on this
In May.
in May. And it's actually a perfect segue to the update I was going to also provide.
Great.
And so, as I mentioned in our last agenda item, the council did have a healthy dialogue about the climate action plan over the course of almost 2 meetings. And so I think it was probably added up to maybe about 5 hours of discussion. So it just goes to show how important it is. And there's just been a lot of, as you have seen through emails, just articles and other kind of information that's been put out there as people are becoming more aware of what it takes to become carbon neutral. And so I think that's good. And I just want to remind everybody that we had this happen with the REACH codes as well with stoves. It's a double-edged sword. So a lot of times while it spurs some negativity, it also spurs some curiosity at the same time. And so you'll probably end up finding people thinking about what is a heat pump and starting to research all of that and then taking those leaps going forward. So there is positive aspects to some of the comments that have been made. And so I'll say with the work plan, so let me back up. So with the climate action plan, the council did provide the kind of scope going forward for 2021, which is good. So staff is able to kind of work from there and be on the same page with the timeline and how things are unfolding as well. And it was good to also just see where each individual council member's thoughts were on the climate action plan as well. So I think if you're looking for 5 hours or 4 hours too, with your pandemic time, you may want to check out that tape. And so again, it was a good discussion and it did get us to where we need to be at this point to keep moving forward. And also last night, the council, so on the cap, I plan on posting it on the website, so the final changes. So we basically added another couple of pages to the cap that talks about 2021 implementation scope of work. So that's really the change there. And I plan on uploading that next week sometime. So just sending it around for the final checkpoints on that front. And then last night also the city council made a great stride with their work plan and priorities for the year. And they did list CAP number 1 as a top priority. So in their top 5 or top 9 list of priorities. And they did include all the other CAP action items in their work plan. So when something's designated as a priority, it's really executing the amount of resources or shifting resources in the organization to make sure that item is successfully achieved. And then the others, we continue to dedicate resources to that as well. And then I did want to add to Commissioner Elkin's point about leaf blowers. So they did defer. There was a lot of community concern about leaf blowers and wanting to ban them in the community through an ordinance and have enforcement as well. And so the council decided to defer that to the Environmental Quality Commission. And so it may, the council has not yet approved the work plan. Their agendas have been quite long, so we're trying to find a good spot. So since they haven't done that, it gives an opportunity at least for it to be added through the EQC and then to go to council. And so I know there is like the catch-all umbrella in the work plan, but the council is keen on having the EQC review this matter and hear the recommendations, whether it's supporting legislation or kind of where to go from that point. So that's all the updates I have.
Thank you.
Any
I have one clarifying question. So last night at the council meeting, they were setting the work plan or they're setting the work plan goals. And what you're saying is all of the CAP action items that were in the 1 through 6 group that we gave them, and then they approved 1, 3, and 5. All 1, 3, and 5 are in the priority list for next year.
No, CAP number 1's in the priority list, but all
Okay,
the other
sorry.
remaining 5 actions are in the work plan.
Okay, gotcha. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Okay, that's really helpful. Are there, yes, Commissioner Elkins?
Yeah, I forgot I have one other announcement. I was contacted by the League of Women Voters who wanted me to let the rest of the commission know that they're having a sea level rise forum coming up next week. I think it is April 29th through One Shoreline. So if you can register for it at oneshoreline.org/LWV forums for League of Women Voters, and it's specifically for Redwood City, Menlo Park, and East Palo Alto. That's it.
Commissioner Martin?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, and I think it's probably because I've had a long history on the commission and I'm about to leave. And I did have a member of the public reach out to me, I think personally, regarding the 7 trees that were removed a couple years ago. And I think at the time, if I recall, it was Janelle, myself, James, Tom, or Commissioner Payne, Commissioner Cabot, and Commissioner Price. Were you on that at the time? Okay, so quite a few of us remember that then. And the concern is, which I think I've maybe raised this before, there was a really bold move, which it was a very difficult and painful heritage tree, probably the biggest one we've ever seen. It's certainly the biggest one I've ever participated in, and it was very difficult and very hard on our community. And Mayor Mueller at the time proposed the idea of, or proposed the action, should I say, that the owners of that property would donate a monetary amount to Canopy to plant 76 trees, if my memory is correct. But that, maybe it was less than that, I can't recall. And, kind of reflecting that here we are 2 years later, and at best, maybe there's been 9 saplings and 3 bushes planted. And I kind of feel like this is one of those times where we really need to kind of hold that account. Like, I think we just really need to know, where are those trees? How's that money being spent? It can get lost in the shuffle quite easily. And I know that we've had, I think that we've had some, maybe in the arborist report, we had a little bit of a report on this, but it was very minuscule from what I remember. So I think we really need to, this member is saying that this should be audited and we really should get to the bottom of this, but I don't think it needs to be quite that draconian. But I do think we really need to, if this commission doesn't keep their eye on the ball on this one and make sure that that happens,
Yeah.
I think that's really going to be, that doesn't sit well with me. I don't think it would sit well with the members that were part of that process. It was very challenging. So I would really like to see closure to that. And I would really like to see a definitive, like, where are those trees? When are they going to be planted? And not the dribs and drabs kind of, it'll just fall off the radar. So I just want to bring that up because I was asked to bring that up in this meeting. And
Sure.
maybe we can get this on the agenda again.
I can give a little bit of context on that, because I advocated that this information be shared during the Arbor Day celebration a couple of Saturdays ago. And so we did get it, the update, and it was shared during the Arbor Day celebration. I don't know who was there, because I got my COVID vaccine, so I wasn't able to participate. But I can tell you there are 33 trees that are remaining to be planted of the original 76. And of the trees that have been planted, 14 trees were planted on the site at 1000 El Camino, 17 were planted in the Bellhaven neighborhood, and 12 were planted on the Burgess Park campus. And the remaining 33 are supposed to be planted in the Bellhaven neighborhood. And they're actually opening it up to people who would like I think part of the reason they haven't planted all of them is they are looking for people who would like it to be planted on their property and opening that up so people can actually ask to get a nice tree planted in their property. And so that is taking place, and we actually have contact information from the folks at Canopy. If anybody in Bellhaven, James, I believe you live in that neighborhood. If you would like a heritage tree planted on your property, we have the contact information for you or any of your neighbors. So that's what I have in terms of information, but I absolutely think following it's very, very important.
Yeah, can I just follow up to that real quick? I think that's great. I think the problem with that is that it's not well known enough. And I attended the Arbor Day thing. It was virtual. It was really difficult to hear. And I just
Okay.
don't think that is the right, it's great that they mentioned it, but we really need like a written, maybe this is a press release, or maybe it's a written thing somewhere where members of the public can go to it, and maybe it's announced. I don't know what it is, but it needs to be
Okay.
more visible. Because that was such a, like, I think we had more members of the public at that heritage tree.
Yeah, there was like
than
100
ever
people
before.
plus there.
So like,
Yeah.
that would be my recommendation, and I really would love to see that happen.
Okay.
The evening news trucks were all, that's what
Yeah, but I mean, I think it needs to be like, that's, again, great that it's on the news, but that's like, if you happen to be watching the news that night, great. But I just think it needs to be like something a little bit more documented
Concrete that we
and
can
sort of
reference.
accessible. Yeah, like that's what I would recommend.
So perhaps, yeah, that makes sense. Rebecca and I can put our heads together on how to share that information. But the good news is that we have it, and that, it is important and we've been following it. I think there was another hand for an update. Commissioner Cabot? No? Okay. I had one up. Oh, Commissioner Gaylord, yes.
Just a couple things. One, at the council meeting last night, there was a discussion about using rubberized or switching from some type of asphalt. I'm not an expert, but rubberized asphalt, which is like chopped up tires.
Yeah.
And I had remembered, I'm not a chemist, but I had remembered, I'm looking to you, James. I had remembered hearing a recent news story that scientists had just discovered why there's huge fish die-off on the West Coast. This was just released in Science magazine, I think in January. And it was, it's because of our tires, our car tires, dissolving into the stream runoff and then ending up in these like salmon, killing off salmon. And it happens like almost instantly when the runoff happens. So it's just like this huge finding by scientists and very new. And when staff was presenting, they were referencing like a 2018 Caltrans study when they were asked, is there any environmental issue? And they said no. And so I just wanted to give you guys a heads up that, especially like James, if you know anything about this, it sounded like council might want to hear from EQC on this, so it might be coming our way. And in the interim, if there's any education, James, you wanted to do with council about that. I don't even know if you know anything about it, but again, I'm not a scientist, but I did, there's a lot of press about it.
Yeah, I know about as much as you said that, yeah, it's a long effort trying to find it out because the ingredient lists of tires aren't made publicly available, but they were able to identify one that, like you said, kills not only salmon, but it turns out a whole bunch of fish and invertebrates and stuff. So that's a great point to bring up in terms of the impact of maybe embedding these in our roads to leach out even further. So I'll do some more reading about that later and see what else I can find out, if that would be helpful.
Thank you, James.
Yeah, Rebecca, is there anyone on staff who should receive that? I think I sent a message to Chris Lamb, who was the presenter, but.
Yeah, and I did get your message too. And I had read those same articles as well a few months ago, and it is depressing. And so I think the tough call there is, what is the alternative to use? I guess it's not the rubberized asphalt, it's the other asphalt that's not recycled. So yeah, but I think you're definitely emailing the right person on that. And just keeping me in the loop as well. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think the reason to move toward it was more expensive, but the reason to move toward it was to reduce traffic noise. So I don't know, it's tough tough call there, but does seem to be quite devastating to marine ecosystems. I have a couple other updates. Did someone else want to say something? CAP metrics. I know it was in the CAP that we wanted to start measuring 9 things, and I know I keep bringing this up, but I would love to know that someone on staff is kind of getting those in place. In the CAP, we recommended they be reported quarterly, and I know that hasn't happened yet, but I'm eager to know more about how that's going and happy to offer up any help. Like if Joanna were going to work on it or anything like that, I'm happy to help. And then I guess maybe Rebecca really covered it, but I also wanted to just add some color. Like council really did struggle over CAP action number 1. And you know, we didn't have as much support from council in the same way that we did with the passing of the original CAP. And so I think that I just wanted the rest of the EQC, if you weren't on the council calls about it, there were some tough discussions. So, you know, I think from my perspective, the right thing to do is to continue to just put the information, you know, it's very data-driven information about if you want to achieve the goal, these are the things you have to do. And then, you know, the elected officials get to decide what's feasible politically for them. But I guess I'm still committed to continuing to put the information forward and trying to not get, you know, too ruffled when, you know, they're tough conversations happening.
So I can share my update. So my update has more to do with my own experience. So I think I shared that I had purchased a new home in Menlo Park, and we're trying to implement a lot of what we talk about here at the EQC. And one of the things I was really struck by were a couple things. One is that I think Bayren has overwhelmed the few contractors that they have, because the responses I got were basically an auto email that's like, we're overwhelmed and we would, you know. So what it made me think of is, right, and this is part of what we're trying to do, and Josie and Tom are doing, is trying to practice, trying to walk the walk in terms of implementing it. And so what I discovered is it is challenging right now, and I think that it is good that we are pushing it forward, but I also understand where people's concerns are coming from, because it is much faster and more straightforward. Just go ahead and do what everybody knows how to do today. And so my update is I have a lot of empathy for people who are raising these concerns, because I completely understand where they're coming from. And, you know, we didn't seek to buy a house with a pool, but we ended up with a house with a pool. And we did all this research and we're like, oh, great, we can get an electric heat pump. It's so great. And I'm on the phone with the solar guys, and he's like, oh no, you can't do that. You can never get enough solar to power the pool. And it's going to be 10 times as expensive. And my husband and I, he's like, well, you need to do this measurement, and went back and forth. And so anyway, the point of all of this is just to say, I really came at a personal level to appreciate the struggles that people are having, and can understand where they're coming from, and why when they see CAP 1, they would be scared and go and talk to council, and why council would also be wanting to understand more. That's not to say that we should change course. I'm very excited about what happened, but I do think for me, it is a lot of empathy, and it is a little bit harder. And I think we are going to learn a lot from the work Josie and Tom are doing. And then, at least for me, the project I'm taking on, to kind of see how we can implement these in our own lives. And I just wanted to share my update, because it was, I still actually haven't done anything, by the way. This has all been calls to try to figure out what I should be doing, or trying to get someone to call me back, because they are overwhelmed because of the rebate, I think. And so, you know, nobody's calling me back. And so it's just interesting, right? But I can get a regular plumber to call me back instantly about replacing my hot water heater. So, but I don't want that, but it's interesting. So I think there is a lot of gain from taking action, because hopefully that will also spur more vendors to get approved by Bayren or whoever, and we can go forward from there. But I just wanted to share my update and how I very much empathize with the people who are having these conversations, because they scare the pants off you when they're talking to you about it, they're like, well, we estimate this is the cost for the solar. And I was like, that's way more than what I was expecting. And it didn't even include the battery backup. And I was like, geez. So again, we can all maybe have some empathy for people who are reaching out to council, and it is very technical and it is confusing. And I know I can call on you guys, but they don't necessarily know that or know anyone that they can call. So I get where they're coming from.
Yeah, that's good. Good to bring up. And in getting my heat pump HVAC installed, which I love, by the way, super, super happy with it. But for me, the process of the city permits was the struggle, not for the HVAC, but for the electrical before it. So yeah, there are definitely, I would encourage everyone to, join the path, and I'll offer myself as a resource. Tom gets asked all the time, but I'm happy to share my experiences. And we're also talking to Bayren and giving them the feedback, like, you need more contractors on your list. So we are passing that along, because we understand, we've heard that. So,
and even I think Bayren, I didn't hear back from for several days, maybe it was a week. So again, and I totally get it. This is not to try to call people out. It's more just to say, like, I'm not sure what we have today is scalable. And so I'm really glad you guys are talking to them. And I'm just trying to go about as if I didn't have special, other people I could ask, and I'm just following the process as a regular citizen. So yeah. But okay, well, that brings us to the end of our agenda. If there's nothing, one more update. Oh, wait, do we have two more? Because Janelle, okay, your hand is raised for real. Okay, Tom and then Janelle. Sorry, Commissioner Cabot.
On the topic of Bayren, they have a webinar tomorrow at 5:30 where people will be talking about different ways to move forward on climate actions. I'll be speaking at that webinar, and I think they break up into Zoom rooms to look at electrification issues. But yeah, we definitely are aware of the big transition the market needs to go through. And in fact, Bayren itself needs to go through, because Bayren was formed as an entity to work on efficiency improvements, and efficiency improvements are kind of predicated on making small steps. And we're into a whole different game. We are no longer trying to fill a little 10% gap in something. We're trying to transform the fuel usage for pretty much everything. And so it's a different game, and we need to keep working with the players for how to transform. As far as what the tradespeople say when they come to your house, when they're trying to sell the product you don't want, they of course give you old information about how expensive solar is. And we see solar on the market now for $2 a watt from some providers, and a little over that from others. So that's very cheap. It works out to be 7 or 8 cents per kilowatt hour electricity. So anyway, it's just difficult to get everybody to change, and they like having that position of authority of telling you there's no way for you to move forward, but there really is.
Thank you, Commissioner Cabot. Commissioner London.
Hi, I just wanted to give a quick update on gasoline consumption. So our baseline that we're going for, that we've established, is the 2018 baseline. And that was for 7 gas stations in Menlo Park, and it was about 11 million gallons of gasoline sold. And as you guys know, every gallon sold is burned, and every gallon burned puts 20 pounds of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, along with a bunch of air pollutants. So that was 11 million. In 2019, our gasoline sales volume was 13.4 million, and we have 8 gas stations reporting. So it looks like we added a gas station and a couple million gallons of gas. So that's the wrong direction. But hopefully with the pandemic, our gallons of gasoline sold went down. We won't know for 2020 till the fall, unless I can get the California Energy Commission to let me know that information earlier. But that's kind of where we are right now. So lots of hope for the 2020 data.
Thank you. Okay. I think this brings us to the end of our agenda, so we can adjourn our meeting at 8:05. Oops, sorry, I just kicked something. 8:05 p.m. Thank you, everybody, and we will see you back in this Zoom room in May.
Hey, everybody.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.